Thank you very much, and welcome to our panel discussion on how to break the power of oligarchs. As Ruth already said, I am Balint, a visiting researcher here at the CEU Democracy Institute, and I will be the chair of today's panel. Before I introduce the panelists, let me just say a few words, just a brief introduction to give some context to this whole topic. So, at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union back in the 1990s, there were two major illusions concerning this region, concerning the post-communist region. The first one was the illusion of linear progress toward liberal democracy and market economy, and the other was that any kind of regime can be built on any kind of ruins of communist dictatorship. So the basic idea back then was that before there had been a bipolar world order with two blocks. There was the Western bloc led by the US representing democracy and capitalism, and there was the Eastern bloc led by the Soviet Union representing dictatorship and socialism. And now, as one of the blocs collapsed, of course, everyone thought that there is no other choice for the countries that once belonged to it but to go to the other pole. So the idea was this, that democracy and market economy remained the only game in town. And of course, everyone saw back then, in the early 1990s, that countries like Ukraine, like Russia, or even Central European countries like Hungary or Poland, they were not perfect liberal democracies and market economies back then. But everyone assumed that they were going to be, because finally they are on the right track. And any kind of problems that were seen in their market functioning, in their democratic functioning, they were just seen as teething problems, as childhood diseases that they will overcome rather than adult personality traits of these regimes. Now, eventually, of course, today we know that these were just illusions, and in perhaps like a decade, it turned out that these were just illusions, and one of the main signifiers of the failure of this transition paradigm was the presence of oligarchs. Of course, today, when we are speaking about oligarchs, we mainly think about the US. And this is perhaps why the topic of this whole conference, the excessive wealth concentration and democracy, feels so salient today, because we are seeing what is happening in one of the oldest democracies in the world, namely the US, when we have a right-wing populist president who is attacking democracy, and apparently he is supported by the super rich. And there is a forming oligarchy around him, and we are thinking about what this means, what the extreme concentration of wealth and the role of billionaires means for the functioning of liberal democracy. However, if we look at the experience of Central and Eastern Europe, we can see that actually oligarchs have been present for 3 decades here. People in countries like Ukraine, Russia, and also increasingly Hungary, have been here, businessmen, rich billionaires who amass their wealth through opaque contracts in opaque ways and influence politics, collude with political power. Such actors have been present here for 3 decades, and therefore we have quite a lot of experience and quite a lot of thinking about what they mean for democratic functioning. At the same time, we have also seen that it is not only oligarchs who have emerged in the post-communist region and in Central and Eastern Europe. There are also other types of players. There are also other types of businessmen who do not amass their wealth through opaque contracts and with the collusion with the state, but through market means and actually producing some value. And even within the oligarchs, or among the oligarchs, we can see that it is not so easy to say that they are the bad guys and others are the good guys. Even the oligarchs sometimes can produce some social benefits, some social values. So, who are the oligarchs? Who are the oligarchs? What kind of relationship do they have with politics and society? Are they good guys and bad guys, and to what extent? And of course, what can we do about them? What can be done about them? What have been implemented? What kind of policies have been tried, and with what success rate, by national governments, so domestically against the local oligarchs, and from the outside by other countries like the United States? These are the questions that are going to be addressed in our panel, and I'm very happy to have 3 excellent panelists, and I would like to introduce them just very briefly. First, we have Balint Magyar. He will start, who is a senior visiting researcher at the CEU Democracy Institute, holding a university doctoral degree in political economy from Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. He has published and edited numerous books on post-communist mafia states since 2013. He was an Open Society Fellow for carrying out comparative studies in the field, Hans Speyer, visiting professor at the New School, Senior Fellow at the CEU Institute for Advanced Study, and Research Fellow at Financial Research Institute. Formerly, he was an activist of the Hungarian anti-communist dissident movement, founder of the Liberal Party of Hungary, member of the Hungarian Parliament, and Minister of Education between 1996 and 98, and 2002 and 2006. The second presenter will be Melnykovska, who is an assistant professor of comparative political economy at Central European University in Vienna. She holds a PhD from the Free University of Berlin and was previously a postdoc fellow at Harvard's Davis Center. Her research explores how global, regional, and local forces shape political and economic systems in Eastern Europe and Eurasia, with a focus on crony capitalism, state-business relations, and regional integration initiatives by the EU, Russia, and China. Her work appears in Europe-Asia Studies, Post-Soviet Affairs, and other journals, and her current work focuses on capital mobility and big business in Russia and Ukraine. Finally, we are very glad to have an overseas presenter as well from the US, Adam Keys, who is the senior director for accountability at Human Rights First, leading efforts to advance human rights in US foreign policy with a focus on targeted sanctions and accountability for abuses and corruption. He oversees a coalition of NGOs that use the Global Magnitsky Act, and last December, he testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of the US on the implementation of global Magnitsky laws. Previously, Adam spent a decade at the US State Department, including serving on the National Security Council and advising the Ambassador for Global Criminal Justice. He has worked with the Open Society Foundations and co-authored a 2019 Holocaust Museum report on genocide policy. He holds degrees from Princeton University and Rice University. So, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and now I'm giving the floor to Balint Magyar. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to take part at this conference. And in this presentation, which is our mutual work with Balint, we would focus on three questions. The first is that who are the oligarchs and who are not, because we think, as even Balint was speaking about before, that it's very important to have a kind of theoretical background. How can we make a difference between these two types of so-called entrepreneurs? What kind of system is produced by the collusion of political and economic spheres? And the third question is how to break the power of oligarchs. The first question, that who are the oligarchs, is we just would like to compare two ideal types of major entrepreneurs and ideal types of oligarchs. When Klaus Hofer wrote in one of his seminal articles about the Western development of Western civilization is based on practically on the separation of social spheres of action, the political sphere, the economic sphere, and the communal sphere. And he stated that it resulted in Western civilization that the relation between the political and economic sphere became formalized, regulated, and transparent. So these became separated. Then, of course, it meant that the entrepreneurial behavior was separated from the political activity. In the case of oligarchs, it's just a different type of development. There is a colluding relation between the economic and political spheres. In the case of major entrepreneurs, you have a formal economic power, but not a formal political one or an informal political one, while the oligarchs has a formal economic power and an informal political one as well, which is partly a result of the colluding spheres on an informal and non-transparent way of politics and economy. It means at the same time that when we go to the second characteristic, that the whole social and political development of Western Europe Western civilization was described as a disembedment of the political sphere from the economic one, or the economic one from the political one. So the relationship within the ruling elite means that the two spheres, the economic sphere is not embedded into the political ones, as I mentioned, is separated and transparent relation between them. And of course, the communication between these two spheres are transparent and regulated, and this is what we used to call lobbying through formal channels to exert influence on each other. While in the case of oligarchs, the economic sphere is embedded partly in the political one, forms informal patronal relations with the ruling elite, the politicians and the so-called entrepreneurs. If we take into consideration their economic activity, in both cases we find legal activities in that sense that I do not consider an oligarch who deals with drug trafficking or human trafficking or other criminal cases. It can happen in certain cases, but not is the dominant one. So from an economic point of view, they are carrying out legal, in quotation mark, market activity. But the difference between them, that in the case of major entrepreneur, there is a competition through legal market practices, but in the case of oligarchs, personal, mainly patronal connections you can witness between the political economic sphere, illegal or legalized colluding practices with the political sphere. Therefore, it determines the case of the success, what we can consider to be success in this so-called business performance. In the case of entrepreneurs, is dependent primarily on their market performance, while in the case of oligarchs, it depended primarily on their patronal relationship with the representatives of the political sphere. And the last thing, that what is the nature of their economic activity is difficult or impossible to monopolize in the case of by the state, in the case of major entrepreneurs, where in the case of oligarchs, these are easily monopolized by the state or by the help of the state. Going further, when we are looking for the conditions of their business venture, in the case of major entrepreneurs, it's not directly influenced by the state arbitrariness, not easy to be blackmailed by the state. Especially not on a discretional way, certain enterprises, while in the case of oligarchs, we see that established by state arbitrariness, partly their whole fortune and activity, and supported their activity in such a way, wholly prone to state influence, and it's very much open to be blackmailed by the non-violent means of state coercion. The source of wealth accumulation in the case of an entrepreneur is mainly through the market, but possibly through competitive privatization, while in the case of oligarchs is mainly directed privatization, state concessions, public procurement with illegally guided bids. The risk, therefore, of their venture is very much different because the nature of economic risk or financial risk of major entrepreneurs is independent from single political actors. It's mainly market dependent, and while in the case of oligarchs, it's under the influence of single political actors based on patron-client relationship. The utilization of profit in their case is absolutely different type. Normally, it's utilized in a transparent fashion and largely reinvested in their own companies. While in the case of oligarchs, the vast majority of their profit, which is normally exceeds the average profit of the given economic branch, is taken or extracted in the forms of dividends and utilized on other personal ways. And the type of venture, if you are a market-dependent venture, you should be innovative, market-oriented, and mainly ruled by the consumers' market decisions, while in the case of oligarchs, they are non-innovative, patronal network-oriented, and got big by patronal intervention through extra-market means. And these are, as I emphasized already, these are the ideal types of a major entrepreneur, how we differentiate them from oligarchs, because in a large share of the literature, these two roles are mixed. When they think that if somebody is rich, is definitely can be an oligarch, vice versa. Now, if we compare two Hungarian businessmen, one is László Bige, who owns the Nitrogén Vegyipari company, it's a major fertilizer company. We compare with Lőrinc Mészáros, who is the richest man in Hungary. He is practically as it used to be called, the purse of Viktor Orbán, so practically he's just a frontman of Viktor Orbán. He's a major, and his major construction company, and we try to set some indicators which should just indicate, really, not definitely define that whether an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur or an oligarch, but these 6 indicators somehow represent this relation. So in the first, and therefore we created a radar chart with Balint of 6 indicators. What is the speed, the growth of their net income as an average? This comparison is just the comparison of the years of 2014 and 2018, this whole 4-year period. So in the case of, you see, in Mészáros and Mészáros Ltd, it's a very sharp growth of the net income. He already, since a few years, is the richest Hungarian, and even in the last year, about his total fortune grew with 2/3 compared with the last year. The second, in the case of Bige László's fortune, we can see that you cannot see such a sharp growth. The other thing is the odds. I will speak on the next slide about it in more details. That odds, the winning public procurements. Practically, the Mészáros, this company, won all the tenders on which he were running. The next indicator is the share of their state contracts within their own income. The share of the next one, the share of the domestic production within it. The profit average, which is close to 20% as an average for these years, which is much higher than the average profit of that in the construction branch. And the last one is dividend rate, which was taken out of the company. We see that in the case of László Bige, who provides fertilizers not for state orders, for the market. He builds his company further if he can. And while in the case of an oligarchs, you will see that they do not have to face any kind of market risk, because they can get so-called friendly state orders, overpriced state orders, with the help of which they can even realize much bigger profit than the average in that branch. And now, if we have a look at just in this Mészáros company, as I mentioned, he has about 300 companies, and this is one of the flagship of his companies. And we see the income in billion Hungarian forint, which was in 2024. The profit rate at that year was 32%. As dividends, he took out 28 billion forints, which is circa about 100%, close to 100% of the profits is just taken out from his company as a dividend. And now let's speak about the so-called odds. This odds is very good indicator because it just shows the share of the number what a given enterprise won compared with that what they lost. In the case of Mészáros company, you see the Mészáros company between 2017 and 2018, within 1 year, this 46 means that he ran on 47 tenders, and 46 out of these 47 tenders were won. And while the others, here we see Swiateski, Strabag, Duna Asphalt, and Mészáros and Közgép, Strabag is an Austrian company very strongly cooperating with Hungarian oligarchs. They were successful in the previous years as well, but you will see that they are far from this one, while the average odds are 0.2, 0.3 in a normal, in a normal enterprise, which means that they are running 3, 4, 5 tenders and they are winning 1, but not running on 47 and winning 46. It shows in itself this practically this close relation between these persons. And now let's go to the second question, that what kind of system is produced by the collusion of political and economic spheres. Our major field of research is Balint together is that when in the mainstream politology they are speaking about democratic backsliding and they are trying to create a typology of different regime types, they are concentrating mainly on formal political institutions on one hand and ideologies on second hand. And the sphere of economy is just has a second importance in any analysis, not a system constituting role, and they are speaking about it in general as corruption. While in a traditional sense of corruption, it means that there is somebody who gives a corruption order, an entrepreneur to a politician, and the corruption provider is normally a politician. When these roles are separated in this corruption transaction between them, and in most of the cases, the two actors remain separate. The entrepreneur won't become a politician, the politician won't become an entrepreneur. But if we want to create a typology of capitalist regimes along those lines, how does it affect the emergence of different hierarchical types of capitalism according the strengths and the nature of collusion of the political and economic sphere, we can separate practically 5 grades this. The first is the liberal capitalism. I was speaking about lobbying, and in the case of lobbying, of course, there is a horizontal relation between economic actors, formal competitive relation, free entry and free exit in this practice, and the nature of favors, which is very important, that through the lobbying, it's mainly they are normative regulations. So, for example, the National Rifle Association is lobbying and paying campaign money of a lot of politicians just to have such regulations which features the arm production. But it does not, they do not have lobbying for certain enterprises on a discretional basis, or different trade unions, or the truck drivers association, etc., etc. So they are, of course, targeting certain economic groups, but these economic groups, through the lobbying effect in ideal type, they are the favors what they get, they are normative ones through regulation. Then the second phase is the so-called cronyism, and this is what used very widely for even the more serious types of collusions, while of course it's still understandable for those researchers who could not witness from inside such societies like Hungary or Russia or such societies, and therefore they have a limited imagination about that how can it work. In the case of cronism, also the two roles of the politician and the entrepreneur remain separated, and still it's they are cronies, means friends, etc., etc. So in this relation with each occasional, of course, you can repeat them, but there is a free entry and free access, free entry and free exit in and out of these relations. The next phase is the so-called what we call oligarchic capitalism. This is the bottom-up state capture, when sometimes criminal groups or oligarchic groups or oligarchs, they are capturing certain parts of the state administration, let it be a local government, a ministry, a special project, etc., etc. In this case, of course, the oligarchs are patrons and the politicians are clients in this relation. It's an informal and competitive one, and in this relation also you can have a free entry and free exit, and it is regulated in such a way that these are already discretional favors which the politicians provide for the oligarchs. When we are making a difference, and this is the next phase, between oligarchs and polygarchs, what we call polygarchs. In the case of oligarchs, you have somebody, an entrepreneur in quotation mark, who has visible formal economic power, but an informal, invisible political one. And polygarchs is just the inverse of this. It has a formal political power and invisible economic power at the same time. But still, in the bottom-up state capture, which is practically the case of the Italian mafia relations, when even a few years ago the Italian police boasted that they just could detain a huge network of mafia, 200 people, and they thought that, let's imagine that there was even one MP among them. Now in Hungary, the situation is just the opposite. If you would detain the members of a criminal organization, there would be 200 MPs among them and one real entrepreneur. So this is when they just mix these two situations, and this is why we have to make a difference between oligarchic capitalism in that sense, when you have the state capture from bottom to up, and on the other way, in patronal capitalism, already the oligarchs who capture a certain part of the economy, but still, in a patronal capitalism, there is not a monopoly in the whole state administration of the operation of a criminal organization. And comes the last one, and I'm boasting and very proud to announce it, that Hungary belongs to this to this type. This is a mafia capitalism. When practically, in a mafia capitalism, the state itself is operated as a criminal organization, when the different parts of the political institutions are acting concertedly and led from the top as a criminal organization. And in this case, of course, as we see, it's of course vertical, but polygarchs, patron and oligarchs and their clients. Most of the oligarchs in this regime are so-called patron-bred oligarchs, which are raised by politicians as frontmen. And in this case, in a mafia capitalism, the formal owner of political power is a prime minister, or in a presidential system, let us say in Russia until the war and Central Asian countries, the president of the country, while at the same time he is the chief patron also of the mafia organization. And of course, I'm a sociologist by profession, and I feel it's very important that the structure of the ruling elite is nothing else, just what we call adopted political family, which means it's a political economic clan, where not individuals are adopted, but but families are adopted, and the non-kinship relation are transformed into quasi-kinship relations and operated as clans. And of course, when this term was used first for Central Asian post-Soviet countries, it has an ethnic nucleus or base of such clan formations. But in Russia, for example, this original base is a KGB. In Hungary is a fraternity house of Orban, etc. So to have an adopted political family and this type of ruling elite structure, you do not have to have an ethnic base originally. You can build up it on different bases as well. So I think that these are, or we think that these are the theoretical background if we try consequently to look for that what are the different types and what is the nature of these collusions between the sphere of politics and economy. And now the last question, that how to break the power of oligarchs. Let's very shortly go through on that. I think that Trump's US is still a liberal capitalist, but with a forming oligarchy. So it's going into the direction, it's an open question whether it will be successful in it or not, but it's going towards the direction of crony capitalism. But of course, it's a very well-structured political system what they have. It's very difficult to break through all these checks and balances which were built in the last few centuries in the United States. And when I'm speaking about crony capitalism, it means that, for example, in the case of Elon Musk, he is independent from Trump. They are cronies in that sense. There is not a patron-client relation. Of course, they can hurt each other in different ways, and if there is a conflict, then it happens. And the question is how to use the anti-monopoly legislation to limit technological and geopolitical influence without public oversight or democratic mandate. In the case of Zelensky's Ukraine, it was a patronal capitalism in that sense that it was not a mafia state because none of the patron-client network could monopolize their power in whole Ukraine. There was a dynamic balance or imbalance of different patron-client networks fighting for political power, and it created a cyclical character of that development that when any of these patron-client networks wanted to create a monopoly of political power, so to reach an autocratic breakthrough. Then came the color revolutions, and with the help of civil society on one hand, and with the help of competing oligarchs, they could turn back this event. But the problem was that during the color revolutions, the democratization was not accompanied by anti-patronal transformation. So now there is a new situation, partly thanks to the war, the Russian aggression, but it started before in 2019 already, when they created this anti-oligarchic law, in which it was defined that you can name an entrepreneur an oligarch if out of 4 conditions he or she can meet 3 of them. Participation in political life. In Ukraine, for example, most of these oligarchs had dependent political party within the parliament. Significant influence on media, which means that a nationwide media, what they own, owner of monopoly in a branch of industry, and owner of assets more than 1 million times above the living wage. And there were, if I remember well, 13 such so-called entrepreneurs, which would, according to these norms, declared an oligarch. But what is important in this definition, that these dimensions should be separated. These dimensions should be separated to avoid the oligarchization and taking over the power. And what we see, for example, in the case of Elon Musk, he just tried to buy practically the Republican Party, not very successfully now, as we see it, the whole one. The second, that he had a monopoly in some branch of industry, space industry, etc. He created a partial monopoly in the media as well with X, what he bought, and he was really very rich, the richest man in the world. So it's strange that Elon Musk, just at the beginning of the Trump era, he met the conditions of being labeled as an oligarch, while originally was not definitely just an entrepreneur. It's a difference, of course, between East European regimes and American ones, that the fortune of Elon Musk was not originated because of political friendships, while in the case of post-communist regimes, mostly for that. So in the case of Ukraine, is when somehow partly this power of oligarchs was broken, and because of the war. Now this is a real question of how they can avoid after the war the oligarchization of that regime as well. In Hungary, with the mafia capitalism, what we have here, the mafia state was established after the autocratic breakthrough of 2010, because to have a mafia capitalism and a single political actor to be the chief patron at the same time, the godfather of the economic sphere as well, you need unlimited political power as well, and the two-third majority, having the two-third majority after the elections in 2010 in Hungary, Orbán reached this position, could monopolize his political power, and at the same time after autocratic breakthrough, as a result of autocratic consolidation, he could dissolve the different forms and terrains of autonomy in the society. Now the real question is that he has a real challenger, and the system, this regime, what is called by Orbán the system of national cooperation, it was renamed by Peter Magyar, the challenger from the Tisza party, system of national co-looting. And the Hungarian regime change, which is necessary to change the character of the whole regime, and it's not enough just to have a government change. It has practically three pillars. One is the restitution of the constitutional state. The other is the dismantling of the criminal state, the central-led criminal organization of Orbán, Orbán's political economic plan, and the third one to finish and to abolish the client relation towards Russia and the dependencies through Russia and partly China as well. And now as the state criminal organization has four functions, when we want to list what should be done, we have to know what is the four functions of such a central-led criminal organization. One is to seize income, powers, and property. The second is to launder the money. The third is to ensure impunity. And the fourth is because they are stationary bandits, so they are not just robbing out a bank and going away, but they robbing out a bank in Hungary, let us say in quotation marks, but not partly in quotation marks, what happened in the case of National Bank in Hungary. But at the same time, they are in the situation that they just take over the leadership of the bank, obliging the people to put their money anyway they as I would say. So therefore, what should be done in the first aspect, to seize income and powers and property, a comprehensive review of funding and procurement decision, the exclusion from public contracts of operators who have been found to be overpriced or illegally favored in public procurement cases, and so on. The second, to launder the corruptly acquired wealth, publicizing the ownership composition of domestic private equity funds, which is now a secret fund. According to Hungarian laws,
sorry, Balint, can you wrap up just in a minute?
Yes, 1 minute. Yes, they don't have to make it public. And even state funds are transferred there and used by its private owners there. To ensure impunity, this is just to have wide-scale investigations among the rich persons, and it means that to maintain autocracy as a stationary bandit, we have to introduce a kind of anti-oligarchic law, like in Ukraine, anti-corruption prosecution office, like in Romania, and joining the EU prosecutor's office. It's very briefly, this is what we could say, what we could do. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for this very exhaustive and comprehensive presentation. And now, Ina.
Okay, so Balint has already prepared you for the case of Ukraine. I just want probably to start with suggesting a more open-end notion and take on those one who are oligarchs and what kind of interests they have. I suggest that we should look at them primarily as pragmatic economic actors that try to maneuver their interest in the political settings that they are involved, and they are probably contingent Democrats or autocrats or fascists, but they are constant defenders of their wealth and assets. And in case of Ukraine, kind of their strategies to defend their assets and to defend their business led to something that we called pluralistic multiple pyramid systems or competitive patronal politics. And just to kind of sum up the key points there, that we have several competing power centers, both in terms of oligarchic groups that have been present, but this was reflected also in different political power centers in Ukraine. So there is certain correlation between political institutions and economic institutions there. So the term of patronal politics always put the focus on patrons, but in fact there have been another layer of competition there. It's not only between oligarchs and state, but oligarchs themselves do not represent a very homogeneous and friendly club of people, but rather they are very heterogeneous and competing with each other. So this horizontal competition was important, and it varied across the sectors of the economy. So some sectors were, say, more oligarchic than the others, and even in the sectors where we had the dominant presence of one or another oligarchic group, there was still some part of business that one could call non-oligarchic. It does not mean that this non-oligarchic business challenged the system, rather it still tried to play according to the games, but it was there, and it was a kind of less dependent on this patronal politics and so on. This is especially important when we think about the damage of the war to different sectors of the economy, and that those sectors that are currently most damaged are also most oligarchic ones, and we have a new structure of Ukraine's economy, even in terms of this oligarchic economy. Then we have also another layer of competitiveness that relates to decentralization of oligarchy in Ukraine. So practically each region represents its own oligarchic regime, and we had not only one big Ukrainian oligarchy, but patchworks of different types. So at the end, we have a sort of asymmetric but mutually beneficial symbiosis, both for business people and for political elites there. So do not, sometimes this notion of capture suggests that we have politicians that are good guys and they are just captured by those economic business actors who are bad. But in fact, you have two to dance in this oligarchic game, and politicians were complicit there as well and had the interest to sustain the system, so that the system also, it was a kind of very dynamic, yes, so it was balanced in its openness, both in political access and economic dispersions, and this openness resulted in fluctuations up and downs, also a kind of enforced by very frequent revolutions and protest regime changes that we have in Ukraine. But nevertheless, a kind of this dynamics does not a kind of compromise the fact that this system remained there for long, yes, and it was very resilient and adaptive. So the outcome of this oligarchic system was democracy in Ukraine by default. So usually patronal politics has its roots in autocratic research. Here, when we talk about Ukraine as the patronal politics kind of system, it's a little bit of conceptual stretching. Nevertheless, here we had some elements of democracy, and this oligarchic pluralism resulted in democracy by default in Ukraine. So how do oligarchic interests, oligarchic groups were able to keep their a kind of persistence despite all the instabilities that we had there, both in terms of political turmoils, but then also in the course of a kind of starting annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass, and now full-scale invasion. So traditionally, we look, first of all, at economic structural power of oligarchs, simply speaking, at their wealth. And we talk a lot about this, but it seems, according to this data, that wealth is not the main power of oligarchs in Ukrainian economy. So although they are rich and the wealth is very concentrated, but nevertheless, in terms of economic share proportion, their share is lower, both in terms of efforts, turnout, but also labor that is employed in oligarchic enterprises. The core of their power lies in political one. They even very frequently started from very low wealth and assets, but because they had very good political ties, both to the presidential, executive agency, to the parliament, to the ministries, and judicial and law enforcement, they were able to accumulate money after that and then again invest it. So the core of this oligarchic court in Ukraine was not money and wealth, but rather political connections that businesses were able to exploit. So what about the war condition? How has the war changed economic and political powers of business, big business specifically? How have Ukrainian businesses been coping and adapting to the war context? And what are the takeaways for post-war Ukraine's reconstruction for us? So in terms of economic...
just 5 more minutes.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of economic power, we see here that, so on the left side, this is a traditional ranking done by business outlet in Ukraine Focus, and they usually kind of had the ranking how much the wealth increased from year to year, and since 2022 it was more about who lost less. Yes, so the ranking kind of changed its interpretation completely. You do not see the kind of the numbers, but you definitely see the trends. Yes, so that since 2001, every oligarchic group had some losses to take. But on the left side, you also see that actually this trend does not start at full-scale invasion. So this is something that happened already much before. And so here in dark blue, we see losses in Ukrainian oligarchic wealth in 2014. And you see that some of them even had a greater share than it was in 2022. So it means, and another interesting fact that in fact, the wealth was also very dynamic. So here are the dynamics of Rinat Akhmetov, the richest among Ukrainian businessmen. And you see that there have been very strong drop in his wealth in 2014 because the geographical location of his companies that you see also on the map. So it was in this Donbass area, and it suffered from the fightings. But in the following years, 2016, where Petro Poroshenko was the president, kind of his wealth increased back very rapidly. So we see that it's again not the wealth and assets that matter, but rather political relationship to those in power. So then, in terms of political power, we see that under martial law, and this is actually worrying trend, there is centralization of power in the hands of the president and presidential office. So media resources of oligarchs are shrinking. Then there is a kind of de facto no power in the parliament, for which oligarchs relied upon to balance the power of the presidents. And overall, around Zelensky, we see a kind of the growing group of his friends that also benefit in material terms, and there is a kind of instrumentalization of martial law by the president. Okay, so now in terms of responses and adaptation strategies, I applied a kind of the scheme that is usually used to score the responses of businesses in times of crisis across the world. So it mainly kind of whether there have been statements of businesses, but also what have been their activities to support state and society of different kinds, individually and collectively. And it has its theoretical rules in the widening of business interest from narrow to broad. Narrow is sort of selfish, while broad is the business interest that is more tailored to the needs of the society. And the outcome of this analysis demonstrates that actually we see a very clear pro-Ukrainian and pro-democratic stand of all oligarchic group and businesses in Ukraine, and this kind of rhetorical standing is supported by different types of actions directed to business, kind of to help state in a different ways, state at national level, state, municipalities at local level, and even a kind of security capacities of the state. So the forms now, and this trend was supported by other business outlets, does not publish the rankings of wealth, but rather publish the rankings of how business supported society and the state. So there is a completely different metrics now that matters. And so there are different initiatives when business supports society and so on. The only one kind of thing that is missing a little bit on this scale is cooperation between businesses. So it's still very individual public support provisions that big businesses are having there. Okay, so with this civic transformation, as I call it, we see certain broadening of business interest in Ukraine in times of war. And of course, the other question would be what, okay, kind of have to use this positive trend, yes? Have to lock in this civic transformation, but also a kind of shape it to make this business a kind of more civilized and what we know as more civilized capitalist from Western countries, for example. And here I refer to the effects of financial internationalization that we know in Ukraine until now. So Ukrainian oligarchy goes beyond Ukrainian borders. This is another feature. Ukrainian businesses are integrated economically and financially in other jurisdictions, including EU jurisdiction. And there have been different effects of this financial internationalization, but one important effect was corporate modernization. And so I suggest that we somehow can build upon this corporate modernization effect on the one side, and then civic transformation of business at wartime on the other side. And so for this we have now another kind of tool of instruments that relate to the fact that Ukraine is on the way towards EU. There are a lot of conditionalities that will target the way how the business is done in Ukraine. But one important part that is not directly related to EU conditionality, but is still very important, is the financial inflows that will go to Ukraine in the realm of recovery funding or Ukraine facility funds, and have to kind of conditions, but on the other side also kind of use the tools of this civic transformation, or engage with Ukrainian civil society, which is also very vibrant, to enforce this positive transformation of Ukrainian oligarchy in general terms. And so going back to the title of this panel, I would say, so we do not need to break the oligarchy, but rather to use the smart and soft toolkit to shape its transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Adam.
I don't have slides. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this panel. I'm starting my timer. Good afternoon. I was asked to speak about the Magnitsky Acts and their potential for helping break the power of oligarchs. The idea being that outside countries and their governments may be able to play a helpful role. My organization, Human Rights First, for several years has worked with and supported a coalition of NGOs that are interested in advocating for targeted sanctions like these. I'll say more about what that means in a minute. In summary, though, Magnitsky sanctions are a potentially powerful tool of outside diplomacy, and governments that have these tools have often been responsive to local activists and others who have documented corruption and sought out these sanctions. But the ways in which these tools have been used also highlights some of their shortcomings, which I'll talk about. First, just very briefly, I'll describe what Magnitsky sanctions are, the Magnitsky Acts. Since 2016, the US and then other governments have adopted legislation allowing them to impose targeted sanctions on human rights abusers and corrupt actors anywhere in the world when they have sufficient evidence of their involvement in those acts. What targeted sanctions generally mean is that a government has barred your entry from that country. It has barred their own nationals from doing business with you, and it has frozen your assets, your access to any assets that you may have had in that country. They're not usually actually confiscating the assets. Countries have a lot of other grounds or authorities to impose sanctions as well, but Magnitsky sanctions are specific to involvement in human rights abuse or corruption. And given the conference's framing, I would note that these sanctions are not aimed at having excessive wealth generally, or even meeting the criteria for being an oligarch like Ukraine has, but specifically at corruption, and usually corruption involving public functions. So for some examples, the US has used its Magnitsky sanctions to address bribery, misappropriation of state assets, fraud in government procurement, money laundering, and state capture, all of these often associated with oligarchs. My NGO works with other NGOs that have documented abuse and corruption to partner in making recommendations for sanctions against specific targets. Whether these sanctions are actually appropriate or likely to be effective depends a lot on the context. I will say that activists that we work with usually see these tools as an alternative means of accountability or a step toward accountability, one that may be attractive when courtroom justice isn't going to be available at home. And unlike many pathways to litigation, lawsuits, there's not a need for a link between the corruption and the sanctioning country's territory or its citizens. Ultimately, this is a foreign policy tool, not a judicial one. So it's implemented by diplomats, so how it's used is subject to the blind spots or competing priorities of the particular foreign ministry. These tools have been used or sought out for a lot of different purposes, not just corruption. Most famously, they've been used to seek justice for alternative forms of justice for specific victims of state killing, like Sergei Magnitsky himself in Russia, for encouraging the release of prisoners who've been arbitrarily detained, for naming and shaming a specific corrupt official or abuser, for keeping someone's ill-gotten funds out of a country or keeping those funds from being taken out of a country. I would say that breaking the power of oligarchs is among the more ambitious goals that you could imagine being set out for this tool. And so I want to give a few examples of Magnitsky sanctions that I think aimed in that direction and that illustrate both the potential for impact as well as some of the reasons why we've seen less or less effective use of this tool than we would like. Most of these examples are of US actions. The US has been the most prolific user of Magnitsky sanctions, though definitely not the only one. It's certainly less likely to make constructive use of these tools under the current Trump administration, which I'm happy to talk more about. As a first example, regarding South Africa, a couple of years after President Zuma was forced from power, the US and the UK both used their Magnitsky programs to sanction for corruption 3 brothers and an associate who had allegedly played a leading role in state capture under President Zuma. South African activists that we've spoken with saw these sanctions as a significant and useful step, one that supported ongoing domestic efforts to turn the page on the state capture era, and that offered extra leverage for advocacy in support of extradition of those who fled overseas. It was significant, though, that the sanctions came after the people targeted had already lost power. In other words, after journalists and domestic institutions had exposed and documented the corruption and its social costs, and done the hard work of imposing political price for it. We see a lot that it seems easier for sanctioning governments to act when the diplomatic risks of antagonizing a host government are lower. Also, I would note that I think while the sanctions were welcomed as an attempt by the US and the UK to do good, local activists had actually been more focused on getting the US to address harm by taking action against US companies that had allegedly played a role in state capture. And it wasn't actually until 2024, last year, that the US Justice Department charged a McKinsey & Company subsidiary with paying bribes to secure consulting contracts in the Zuma era in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. As a second example, it's a small one, but I think interesting, regarding Latvia. In 2019, the US sanctioned an alleged Latvian oligarch for having leveraged and corrupted law enforcement officials to protect his interests, among other corrupt acts. This was a rare case where sanctions prompted a very quick government action against an oligarch. The US sanctions had also targeted a port company that the gentleman controlled, and the Latvian government acted quickly to remove him from his position controlling that port so that the sanctions would be lifted off the port company. This is a pretty unique and narrow set of circumstances focused on a very discrete target in the context of a friendly government relationship and in a fairly well-established liberal democracy. But I think it's an interesting example of the kind of impact that is possible. A third example regarding the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the US several years ago sanctioned an Israeli businessman described as a close friend of Congo's then President Joseph Kabila, alleging that the businessman built his fortune through hundreds of millions of dollars worth of opaque and corrupt mining and oil deals in the DRC. The US sanctioned dozens of companies that the businessman controlled too. This is a long and complex story that's still ongoing, but I think in general terms it was a serious intervention by the US aimed at actors who were very much still in power. And I think its significance was as much political as it was financial. These sanctions, as part of a broader international push, are often cited as a factor in Kabila's decision not to change the constitution to allow himself to be further reelected. Lastly, and just very briefly, Russia. I think the story of US and European sanctions there is a very complex one. My theme here would just be that more extensive use of Magnitsky sanctions or other sanctions could have been a powerful impediment to Westerners doing business with Russian oligarchs. The US executive branch, though, under multiple administrations, was reluctant to implement these sanctions very aggressively, usually citing competing diplomatic priorities, until Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 left basically no choice and forced it to adopt even more ambitious goals. Today, thousands of Russian individuals or companies are sanctioned by the US, which I think makes it jarring to remember that, just as an example, Alexei Navalny's organization was campaigning in 2021 for sanctions on a list of just 35 Russian officials and oligarchs, and that even that was hard to get the US to take action on. Excuse me. Obviously, we can't say how a more extensive effort at sanctions might have changed the course of events, but we know Russian and Ukrainian activists who see it as a major missed opportunity. So, in sum, yes, we see a lot of potential in this tool, as well as a lot of shortcomings in how it's been used in practice. Many governments, not just the US, the UK, the EU, Canada, Australia, and others have this tool. It is hard to count on them using it in a timely or consistent or sufficiently forceful manner at times. We sometimes see it used only after the oligarchs are already broken, as it were, and it's sort of too late to help the reformers with the hardest part. We often see corruption overlooked in countries that are either too sensitive diplomatically or too low profile to prioritize. These governments' capacity to do sanctions investigations is another constraint, especially for the US has more capacity to do this, although drawing on information from outside sources like NGOs can be a way to mitigate that. We've also encouraged governments to do a better job of matching each other's actions. For just as an example, the US sanctions against the Israeli businessmen in Congo haven't been matched by other jurisdictions. The UK's sanctions against the vice president of Equatorial Guinea haven't been matched by others. The EU actually doesn't have an anti-corruption sanctions program at all. Its Magnitsky program is only sort of has the human rights abuse side of the house. And lastly, about the United States, we're worried that we're seeing partisan fluctuation in sanctions. The Biden administration's last-minute sanctions against a senior Hungarian official for alleged corruption were very quickly reversed by the new administration without offering any substantive explanation. That's bad for the credibility of the program, obviously. Also bad for that purpose is the broader collapse of US credibility on anti-corruption at all. We're seeing an almost complete abandonment of any anti-corruption agenda, the pardoning of convicted corrupt politicians and businessmen, among other recent horrors. In that context, talking about Magnitsky sanctions is obviously vital for the other Magnitsky jurisdictions to do more to fill this gap that the US is leaving. Conscious of time, I'm happy to talk more about the application of these principles to the oligarchy forming under Trump, as I think Balint put it, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for their wonderful talks and very interesting, a lot of food for thought. I can see that we are a little bit out of time or out of schedule, and that is completely my fault. So I'm going to scratch all my questions and turn to the audience now. So if you have any questions, please just raise your hands. And yep, there is one back and there's one here. Let's start here and then we will go back. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. That was, again, very thought-provoking. I really liked your attempt to start modeling different forms of oligarchic politician relationships. And of course they are ideal types, so you're always going to have people that are sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. But what I really wanted to ask you a bit more about the balance, but also Inar actually, is you have two models or three with vertical relations, the oligarchic power, where the oligarchs are in charge, and then you have patronal and mafia, where the politicians are in charge. But very often there are changing power relations over time. So from Yeltsin to Putin, for instance, or we've heard Zelensky's story. And I think very often from the outside we can see a symbiosis, but we can't necessarily see, when and how that power switch happens. And I think we need to think through harder what the sources of power of both parties are, in order to better understand that and kind of also have more dynamic modeling. And also this really relates also to Inna's presentation, to think through certain sectors are obviously much more prone to some sort of capture. So construction, I think, is almost never completely free of it, even in the most perfect liberal democracy. There's some cronyism, whereas more consumer-facing businesses may face this problem much less. I used to think the extractive sector was very much prone to it, but then the Anders presentation yesterday made me rethink that. So yeah, changing sources of power, differences between sector, I think we're only scratching the surface there. Very briefly to Adam's presentation. So I've done research on the targeted sanctions against the Russian oligarchs. and I am not such a fan of them. They were very sloppy, based on bad research, and I think in terms of their punitive effects, they can actually breach human rights principles. And it's very hard to feel sorry for the oligarchs because they're oligarchs, not that badly affected. But I do think we should feel sorry for our liberal democracies and actually think through much more at what point these people and their illicit funds enter liberal democracies and try to build in safeguards there rather than punitive action after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation. My name is András Bozoki. I have just two brief questions to Balint Magyar. In your previous work, you referred to mafia state as a post-communist mafia state, but now you are not talking about post-communism. So is there any specific meaning that after 35 years you feel that post-communism is not so important anymore? It was just a temporary impact. And the second question is about mafia capitalism. You qualify Hungary, rightly, like that. And would you also qualify Russia as mafia capitalism to put to the same basket or not? Thank you.
I was adding on to Marlies's comment about which sectors are particularly prone to this, and I think there's something about construction. So it's a type of property that maybe should not be property. That was one of the institutional innovations that I've seen in Posen and Wildesburg, radical markets. Right? Some things maybe should always either be public or always for sale in a way like permanent auctions, things like that, because the oligarchic power derives from certain extractive rights or sector when you have the property right. And maybe property rights are not good for some sectors because they encourage oligarchs. And we should think about alternatives to property.
Thank you very much. Very shortly, and I asked Balint also to answer for these questions as well. Well, this 15 or 20 minutes presentation was just a very short abbreviation of a book what we wrote together in 2018 and 19. It's about 900 pages, and we built up a special methodology for the description of these post-communist regimes, where we doubled the democracies just for liberal democracy and patronal democracy, the autocracies, conservative autocracies and patronal autocracies, and the dictatorships, classic communist dictatorships and market exploiting dictatorship, and it creates a triangle in which there is a trajectory of different of these regimes. We have a shortened version of this book, Concise Field Guides of Post-Communist Regimes, where you can find short 3, 4, 5 pages description of these countries and about these trajectories, how they go. All of them are open access in five languages, so it's available. Just answering András Bozoki's question, yes. Until the Russian aggression, I considered Russia, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian post-Soviet republics mafia states as well. Now Russia, I think, is going into a dictatorial direction in a war mode where practically even it differed in some respects from the Hungarian mafia state in that respect that the secret service pillar of that power was much stronger than in Hungary, for example, but the oligarchy is much more eliminated or pushed back in this as a result of this war mode, as they are going into even towards a dictatorial regime. And what is not characteristic for these post-communist mafia states, that they are ideology applying and not ideology led regimes. Now Russia is going into a direction to be an ideology-led regime as well as a result of this movement. Why we use the term post-communist mafia state regimes? Because there were some axioms what we did not have to dissolve when we analyzed this. So, for example, when we analyze post-communist regimes, that we could assume that there is no failed state among these countries what we analyze. If we expand our investigations, then of course we had to dissolve or open this axiom as well. And such also another axiom what we should not have to abolish, that the so-called cover organizations of oligarchic rule, these are political parties, while in other countries this can be a military rule as well, or a theocratic type of rule, what we did not have to deal with when we analyze post-communist regimes. Of course, in a lot of respect it can be used for other regimes as well, and not just for the post-communist countries.
Okay, Marlis, there have been several questions there, and I tried to kind of connect answering them all. So I would say that Ukrainian oligarchs are actually great performers in terms of both economic and political diversification. They, first of all, were famous for kind of putting their eggs in different baskets of political parties and political powers. And, for example, Akhmetov-Yanukovych tandem that we had for a couple of years was rather exclusion than the rule. In fact, kind of the relationship between political elites and business groups are very dynamic. There are a lot of kind of competition, disputes, but also ad hoc cooperation there. So that this dynamic makes it really kind of difficult to put it into one or another box. What kind of relationships do we have there? In terms of economic diversification, so in fact, there have been a lot of tendencies there as well. Actually, oligarchic, even before 2022, started, so oligarchic business started to withdraw from oligarchic kind of industries, or try to diversify them. And if we again talk about Akhmetov, then his SKM company tried to get rid of most kind of oligarchic part of the business in mining sector and be more involved in electricity production sector that is very deeply integrated in the EU markets. So there are also a sort of diversification strengths that will be enough further enforced by the reality of the war, where those most oligarchic industries are the most suffering one. And new kind of sectors that are less oligarchic are coming into place, for example, IT sector. So here it's not proximity to the state that matter as a kind of advance for the business, but really technological advance, what kind of drones you build, whether your drones can be more useful at the battlefield. This is something that will define whether your drones will be bought in procurement deals or not. So we are sort of back in this instance to normal business. And in this sense, we see also the interest on the side of big business to cooperate with Ukrainian IT companies and probably kind of create business-to-business partnerships there. Yes, construction will be a big issue. I will just kind of throw it. Housing is even more damaged by the war than industry in Ukraine. But at the same time, we know from the pre-war times that big construction plan of Zelensky was the industry where kind of the most profitable rent-seeking have been done before the war. So there is definitely oligarchic risks there.
To the question about sanctions, I guess misuse or sloppy use, I would definitely share those concerns. I think there are uses of US sanctions that we have very strongly opposed. I think the most spectacular abuse of the tool has been the Trump administration's new sanctions program targeting the International Criminal Court and its staff. We have pushed for legislation that would amend US sanctions laws so that multilateral bodies couldn't be targeted like that. We recently successfully sued the Trump administration on behalf of an ICC trial lawyer who was being prevented from doing his job by the sanctions. I think the Magnitsky programs, for what it's worth, are less susceptible to misuse. We have 8 years of experience now seeing them. in part because of the factual showings that they have to make compared to some of the other country-specific programs. Although we definitely fear that the Trump administration will find novel ways to misuse them. I think ultimately the bottom line is that the EU has better judicial supervision of sanctions than the United States does, and I suspect that the experience of this new Trump administration will end up pushing the US in that direction.
Thank you. I think we have still time for 2 questions, so if you have a question, Andreas? We don't have time for, maybe for 1 question then? 1 question, someone? Yeah. No. Come on. Yeah, well, we tried. So, well, if no one has any more questions, then, I thank very much the panelists for these great talks. Thank you for their questions. I hope you also enjoyed it. I think it was very thought-provoking, and we have learned a lot in terms of how these systems work, what these systems are, and how whether it is justified to argue that all billionaires are immediately oligarchs, or maybe the picture is a lot more nuanced, and we have to look at what these oligarchs actually do, what kind of positive or negative sides they have, and of course whether and how they can be regulated or should be regulated, or how their powers can be turned for bad or good. So I think we have a lot to think about, maybe to continue over lunch. So thank you very much.